I spent 15 years flying things most people never see, human hearts packed in ice, donor lungs sealed in sterile containers, blood products that had minutes, not hours, before they became useless. When my phone rang, it wasn't a suggestion. It was a countdown. Somewhere, someone was dying, and the distance between life and death was however fast I could get my plane off the ground. I was a certified commercial pilot specializing in medical transport. No sightseeing. No joyrides. My job existed for one reason: to move critical medical cargo between hospitals that couldn't afford to lose time. Rural clinics. Mountain towns. Places ambulances couldn't reach fast enough. I flew across 3 states, often at night, often with weather that made most pilots stay grounded. Lives depended on my decisions, my reflexes, my ability to launch within minutes of the call. I kept my aircraft in flawless condition, a single-engine Cessna maintained better than most commercial planes. It was stored at a small private airstrip just outside a residential neighborhood. Fully legal. Fully zoned. Approved long before a single house had been built nearby. I checked that twice before moving in. When I took off, the engine noise lasted about 90 seconds. From ignition to altitude. 90 seconds. Barely louder than a lawnmower. Apparently, that was 90 seconds too many. I'd been living there about 3 months when I met her for the first time. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't smile. She stood on my porch with her arms crossed, lips pressed tight, eyes already narrowed like she'd rehearsed the conversation in her head. "You need to stop flying that plane during dinner hours," she said. No greeting. No question. Just a demand. I explained calmly, because I'd had this conversation before, that I didn't fly on a schedule. Hospitals called when they had emergencies. Organs don't wait. Blood doesn't wait. If I got a call, I flew. Evening. Night. Sometimes 2 in the morning. She stared at me like I'd insulted her. "Well, that's not my problem," she said. "My family deserves peace and quiet." I told her, again, as politely as I could, that my work saved lives. That sometimes a short burst of noise meant someone else got to see their family again. That it wasn't optional. She scoffed. "You could find another airstrip," she said. "Or maybe find a different line of work." That was when I realized logic wasn't going to matter. She introduced herself as a representative of the HOA. I'd heard about her before, everyone had. The neighborhood enforcer. The rule collector. The woman who carried a binder to HOA meetings like it was a weapon. Before she left, she leaned closer and said, "If you keep flying during our dinner time, I promise I'll make this very difficult for you." I laughed after she walked away. That was my mistake. 2 weeks later, I received my first notice from the FAA. An anonymous complaint alleged I'd been flying below minimum altitude over residential areas. Completely false. My flight logs, GPS data, and transponder records proved that. The FAA investigated, as they always do, and cleared me. Then another complaint came in. Reckless maneuvers. Unnecessary low passes. Again, provably false. Each complaint triggered paperwork, interviews, log reviews. Time I should have been spending flying missions or resting between calls. Stress that didn't belong anywhere near a cockpit. The complaints kept coming. Every one more detailed than the last. Someone claimed I'd circled houses deliberately. Someone else claimed my plane shook windows. Another accused me of violating noise ordinances that didn't even apply to federally regulated airspace. I knew exactly who it was. Karen started watching my takeoffs from the edge of her driveway. Arms crossed. Phone out. Sometimes she'd write something down. Sometimes she'd just smile. The HOA began sending warnings. Not violations, just concerns. Thinly veiled threats wrapped in polite language. I responded with documentation. FAA approvals. Zoning records. Noise studies. Facts didn't slow her down. Then came the complaint that changed everything. It wasn't anonymous this time. Karen filed a formal report with the FAA accusing me of buzzing her house at dangerously low altitude. She claimed I'd been drinking before a flight. Claimed my aircraft was poorly maintained and unsafe. She submitted timestamps, supposed witness statements from neighbors, and photos she said proved my recklessness. The photos were doctored. Anyone with aviation knowledge could tell. But the FAA couldn't ignore it. Federal aviation law requires them to act. One afternoon, my phone rang, and the voice on the other end told me my commercial pilot license was being suspended pending a full investigation. Effective immediately. Just like that, I was grounded. No flights. No missions. No calls. The medical transport company scrambled to cover my routes, but pilots like me weren't exactly sitting around waiting. Coverage gaps opened immediately. I watched the sky every day from my backyard, listening to planes I wasn't allowed to fly anymore. Knowing somewhere, someone was waiting longer than they should for something I used to deliver without hesitation. I hired a lawyer. We started building the case, timeline, harassment, inconsistencies, forged evidence. But federal investigations don't move fast. And lives don't wait. 2 weeks into my suspension, while I was sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by paperwork and legal fees, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't the FAA. It was a transplant dispatcher. Her voice was tight. Urgent. Familiar. They had a pediatric heart. Critical condition. 12-year-old girl. Less than 4 hours before complete failure. The donor heart was 240 miles away, across terrain that made ground transport impossible in time. I was the primary pilot for that route. And for the first time in my career, I had to say the words I never thought I'd say. I can't fly. There was silence on the line. Then her voice cracked. She said they'd try to find someone else. I hung up and stared at my grounded plane. That's when my phone exploded with notifications. Messages. News alerts. Neighborhood group posts. And that's when I learned who the little girl waiting for that heart really was. I didn't need to open the messages to know something was wrong. My phone kept vibrating on the table, screen lighting up again and again. Missed calls. Neighborhood group notifications. A news alert from a local station. My name wasn't mentioned, but I recognized the hospital. County General. The pediatric cardiac unit. And then I saw her name. Karen's daughter was the 12-year-old girl waiting for that heart. The same woman who'd stood on my porch complaining about dinner noise. The same woman who'd filed the report that grounded my plane. The same woman who said my work was not her problem. Now her child's life depended on the exact flight she had taken away from me. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling something twist in my chest that didn't have a name. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even shock. It was the sick realization that reality had aligned itself in the cruelest possible way, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The dispatcher called back 30 minutes later. They still hadn't found a pilot. Every qualified transport pilot in the region was either already airborne or too far away to make the window. The heart had a strict viability limit. Every minute it sat in ice was a minute closer to failure. She didn't ask me to break the rules. She didn't need to. We both knew I couldn't. A single unauthorized flight would permanently end my career and invalidate the transport legally anyway. I was useless. For the first time in 15 years, I was forced to sit on the ground while a clock ran out on a child. Eventually, they found someone. A pilot from another state, rerouted mid-assignment. But logistics don't bend for desperation. The aircraft had to land, refuel, swap medical crews. What should have been a clean 90-minute flight turned into chaos. 4 hours passed. By the time the heart reached the operating room, it had been outside the body too long. The surgery went forward anyway, because sometimes hope is all doctors have left, but it wasn't the controlled procedure it should have been. It was a gamble. Karen's daughter survived. Barely. She suffered complications from the delayed transplant. Damage that would follow her for the rest of her life. Extended ICU stays. Long-term medication. Reduced heart function. Things that didn't need to happen. Things that wouldn't have happened if I'd been allowed to fly. The neighborhood found out fast. Someone connected the dots. Then everyone did. The FAA complaints. The suspension. The delay. The child. Karen. The HOA Facebook group exploded. Screenshots of her messages. Copies of her complaints. Neighbors who'd been listed as witnesses came forward, furious that their names had been used without permission. Parents were livid. Not because she was annoying. Not because she was strict. But because she'd weaponized bureaucracy over 90 seconds of noise and nearly killed her own daughter in the process. The tone shifted overnight. People who'd avoided her crossed the street to confront her. Others simply stopped acknowledging her existence. Invitations vanished. Conversations ended when she entered a room. The HOA board held an emergency meeting. Karen wasn't invited. Meanwhile, my lawyer delivered everything to the FAA. The pattern. The timing. The fabricated evidence. The doctored photos. The witness statements that fell apart under even casual scrutiny. The harassment timeline that started the moment I refused her demands. Once the investigators understood what they were looking at, everything moved fast. Very fast. My suspension was lifted within days. I received a formal written apology from the FAA. My license was reinstated with no penalties, no marks, no restrictions. They acknowledged the complaints had been malicious. But they didn't stop there. Filing false federal aviation reports is a crime. Interfering with critical medical operations is a serious one. When lives are put at risk, the system stops being patient. Karen was charged. Federal charges. Her husband filed for divorce 2 weeks later. He took their daughter and moved across the country to be closer to a specialized medical facility that could handle her ongoing care. I heard he cited her actions directly in the filing. That he couldn't live with what she'd done, or almost done. Karen lost everything quietly after that. The HOA board removed her immediately. No debate. No vote. Her house sat on the market for months. When it finally sold, it was at a loss. No one wanted to live next door to her. No one wanted her story. She became invisible in the community she once controlled. I heard she moved out of state. I never confirmed it. I was too busy flying again. My first mission back felt heavier than the rest. Not because I was rusty, but because I was aware, in a way I hadn't been before, of how fragile the chain really was. How many lives depended not just on skill or speed, but on people choosing not to be small. I still fly that route regularly. Every time I take off, the engine roars for about 90 seconds. Sometimes I think about Karen's daughter. I hope she's getting the care she needs. I hope she grows up understanding that the sound her mother hated wasn't noise. It was time. It was hope. It was someone racing the clock so another family wouldn't have to sit in silence, waiting for a phone call that never comes. And every time my wheels leave the ground, I remember that the smallest acts of selfishness can echo farther than anyone expects. So can the sound of an engine carrying a heart toward someone who needs it.